everybody. Welcome to Medicine and Science on the Pod TV network. I'm Nick Palavita. I will be your moderator for today's program. And today's program, we're going to discuss the return of COVID-19. Now, I actually took my third vaccination because I'm traveling to Barcelona in about a month from now. And frankly, I just don't like getting sick. And I certainly don't like dying in either a foreign hospital or a US hospital. It just doesn't sound like a good thing. Now, that doesn't mean other commentators say, oh, don't bother. But unfortunately for me, getting sick and dying aren't on my to-do list. But we do have somebody who does have some comments about that. You've seen him on the internet, on LinkedIn, of course, and we broadcast through LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. You may be watching us on Roku. We have our own channel on Roku as well as Amazon Fire. And with that, none other than Dr. Michael Patmas. So, Michael, welcome to your show, and maybe you can help the audience about this COVID-19 resurgence. I saw it resurging, and I have a real problem. I don't like getting really, really sick. But other people, maybe they're sick people, don't seem to mind it. But what are your thoughts about the resurgence of COVID-19?
Well, good morning, Nick, and thank you for the invitation to spend some time with you. And thank you to your audience. I cherish the opportunity to be able to share some thoughts with you. First of all, it's very important to establish, my credentials. We have a lot of people out there today who don't have correct credentials who are posing as experts. I am a board-certified internal medicine physician with added qualifications in infection control and hospital epidemiology. I've been a doctor for over 43 years. I continue to practice and licensed in 12 states. So I do a fair amount of telemedicine practice. So I'm able to take care of patients in a third of the United States. So I see a lot of people from all different states. My experience has been as a general internist. I also have worked as a physician executive, as a chief medical officer, and so forth. But I have never stopped seeing patients all these years. I've seen somewhere north of 300,000 patients. In the past month, I have treated about 400 or more patients. About half of them tested positive for COVID, and I've kept pretty good track of the numbers. Of the 200 or so people that I've treated in the past month with COVID, most had some vaccination. None were up to date or current on their vaccinations. None of them had been vaccinated against the FLIRT current variant. Most of them had one or two vaccinations back in 2021 and then gave up on it and haven't been vaccinated since. Nearly all of them were moderately sick, moderately to more severe. None needed hospitalization, and most of them were candidates for Paxlovid. Most all of them have had COVID at least once before. So that's just reflective of my experience as a practicing physician who sees patients every single day. So it raises the question, is COVID back? Well, that's a kind of a tricky question. Yes, it's back, but I have news for you. It was never gone. It was there all along. COVID has experienced increases and decreases, but it has never gone away. The emergency was declared over a couple of years ago when the numbers declined, but the pandemic never went away. COVID has not gone away. And as of right now, based on wastewater data and on the percent of people who are infected, there's about 5, 6, 7%, maybe a little more of the American population who are currently hosting the COVID virus and actively replicating it and disseminating it. To put that in perspective, we have about 350 million people, so 10% is 35 million. So we have somewhere around 30 million virus factories in operation in the United States right now. These virus factories produce the virus, reproduce the virus, host it, maintain it, allow the virus to mutate, and then disseminate it. And those factories producing this virus and spreading it to others are people. That's where the virus comes from. It comes from people. It doesn't come from trees. It doesn't fall from outer space. If you get COVID, you got it from somebody else. If I get COVID, I got it from you. If you get COVID and I have it, then I gave it to you. We give it to one another. We are the perpetuators of the persistence of COVID. Now, that concept well, first of all, this resurgence was predicted. If you go back and you look at my posts on LinkedIn going back 3 years, I said all along, unless we get to 95% vaccination of the population, the virus will become endemic. It will become established in a human host reservoir, and it will continue to replicate, mutate, and disseminate. And people will continue to infect one another as long as we are under immunized. The current statistics are that in the United States, less than 20% of people are current and up to date on their immunization. What that means is that 80% of the American population has put out a welcome sign. We're open. Vacancy. COVID virus, come reside in us. We're hosting you. We're being hospitable. Come and invade our bodies, take over our intracellular machinery, and we'll make more copies of you and spread it to those we love. That's the situation that we live in. So the creation of a host reservoir is the problem. We have a large host reservoir now, and that host reservoir is the reason why we're spewing out always these new variants, and they've changed. I mean, if you look at the molecular biology of this virus, it has evolved a lot. Today's COVID virus is substantially different than the COVID virus from 3 years ago. There's an enormous amount of misinformation spread by people who are unqualified. And one of the key pieces of misinformation is that, well, you can get vaccinated and you might still get COVID, therefore the vaccine is worthless. That's wrong. It doesn't reflect the proper understanding of why we vaccinate. There's one overriding reason to vaccinate. The primary goal of vaccination is to prevent death. People who are unvaccinated against COVID have a likelihood of dying that's 525% higher than vaccinated people. Let me say that again. If you're unvaccinated and you get COVID, your chances of dying are 525% higher, more than five-fold higher. If you had a 525% better chance of winning the lottery, you'd be standing down there at that convenience store buying tickets. But yet you're 525% less likely to die if you're vaccinated, and people are rejecting vaccination. Less than 20% of the American population is up to date on their vaccinations because they've been misinformed. Let's be clear. It is the failure to vaccinate sufficiently that is the reason why COVID became established in the human host reservoir. And that's what's perpetuating the constant generation of new viruses and new variants. There's such enormous misinformation on cable news, social media, and this misinformation is being spread by unqualified experts. These are doctors who are either unlicensed, never did an internship, never completed a residency, are not board certified in any specialty, or have had their board certification removed for professional scientific misconduct, or they never did an infectious disease fellowship. They're not board certified in infectious diseases, and they don't have training in infection control and hospital epidemiology. Those are the minimum criteria that you have to be an expert in this. Unless you have that, you're not an expert. Unless you're board certified, fellowship trained in infectious diseases, or have training in infection control, you're not an expert, and you shouldn't be opining as such. I have the same qualifications as some of these experts out there, and then some. I too have a bachelor's degree. I too have a master's degree in biochemistry and nucleic acids. I too have an MD. But unlike others, I am board certified in internal medicine, and I have training in infection control, and I have been a hospital physician for over 40 years, treating patients every day in the trenches. Those are the criteria, the minimum criteria to be an expert. Anything less than that is not. So where do we go from here? Well, the first thing we have to do is we've got to purge the misinformation. And that's a real challenge because they're hiding under the First Amendment. We haven't had any success of purging misinformation. We have to discredit the fake experts. Their resumes need to be vetted publicly. If someone's on TV and says they're an expert in COVID, the journalists need to pull their background and do primary source verification and verify that they actually have the credentials they claim. It's because it's on a resume doesn't mean it's true. Most resumes are loaded with lies. Just because they say they were a professor, that's got to be double checked. You got to call the university and see if they really were. So we need to vet our experts, and if they're unqualified, we have to get them off the air. They're not experts. They can say what they want, under the First Amendment, but their opinion is just that. It's not an expert opinion. And we've got to correct the misinformation, and that's an uphill battle. We're losing that fight because the media just continues to put these fake experts on TV. They're on CPAC, they're prominent, they're testifying in Congress, and they're all not real experts. So that's the dilemma that we face. What we need to do, and my recommendation as an infection control expert, is we need to get 95% of the American population fully vaccinated and up on the current vaccination for the current form of COVID. And that's probably going to change again soon. Getting repeated vaccinations is nothing unusual. We do that every year with influenza because the influenza virus also mutates rapidly. Some vaccines, you're good for life. Measles, you're good for life because it doesn't mutate, because it's not being hosted anywhere. And the mutations come from replications. The more people who are infected, the more replications, the more mutations, the more new variants. You get rid of that host reservoir and you reduce the generation of variants. So getting immunized once a year should be no concern to anyone. It's just like with influenza. The vaccine is extraordinarily safe. There have now been billions of doses given. The incidence of serious side effects is vanishingly rare. I think there have been about 145 cases of myocarditis documented that were significant. Myocarditis occurs from the common cold. We see it all the time in the emergency room. About 2% of people in the ER with chest pain have myocarditis. They get it from the common cold. So myocarditis is not unusual, but it's very rare after COVID vaccination. It's much more common associated with COVID infection. And one last point before we turn it over for questions. People say, well, I don't want that spike protein from the vaccine. You're going to get a little bit of spike protein from the vaccine and it's cleared from your body quickly. If you don't want the spike protein, don't get COVID, because the virus has the spike protein in logarithmically more percentage, a logarithmically greater amount. So if the spike from the vaccine has you worried, the spike from the disease ought to worry you a lot more. You're going to get COVID one way or another. You're either going to get the vaccine or you're going to get the virus. The virus might kill you. The vaccine won't. So with that, I'll stop. COVID never went away completely. It is back, and it's back because we have failed to vaccinate sufficiently. Any questions?
Yeah, I do have some questions, Dr. Patmas. Some commentators say that the COVID is just like the flu. Is it like the flu? Is it just the flu?
No. So here's the truth on that. That's an attempt that actually came from Trump administration to diminish, downplay the severity of COVID. Remember, he said it's going to go away, just like magic. It's going to go away. It's going to be like the flu. No. First of all, they're completely unrelated viruses. SARS-CoV-2 is a beta coronavirus. It's in a whole different taxonomic tree. The influenza viruses are orthomyxovirity viruses. They're very different. They're completely, they're as different from one another as an octopus is from a daisy. They're very different entities. The only thing they share is that they're both RNA viruses. So a virus is either a DNA virus or an RNA virus. But other than that, and one's a negative RNA, the other one's a positive RNA. But other than the fact that they're RNA viruses, there's no genetic relationship between influenza and COVID. It's a totally different virus. Secondly, the disease presentation is completely different. An experienced clinician can walk into a room and distinguish the difference between a typical influenza and a typical COVID presentation. They look nothing like one another. Influenza looks as different from COVID as it does from a common cold. There's no relationship. If you understand the clinical presentation of these diseases, a good clinician with experience in infectious diseases can say that patient most likely has influenza, that patient most likely has COVID. And there's a totally difference between them. They're not the same disease.
Okay, and another thing that happened, I recently took my third COVID vaccine because of this mutation. And immediately on the internet, somebody said, "Oh, I'm destroying my body. Go ahead and do it." All this other stuff. And I was looking, I said, "But wait a minute. What I have seen is COVID's back, and I travel. I'm going to Spain, and last thing in the world I want to do is get COVID. So is this guy right that I'm destroying my body, or is he completely wrong?" It's just some person.
Completely wrong. That's misinformation. And I mean, we can't go by our own personal experience, but I've had 7 COVID vaccinations. And as soon as the next one comes out in a couple of months, I'll be getting that one. I have no hesitation getting vaccinations. I get vaccinated for everything. I've been vaccinated for measles, mumps, chickenpox, pneumonia, RSV, shingles. I get all vaccines. I'm an infection control doctor. I don't want to get sick. I've never had COVID, despite coming face to face with it every day. 7 vaccines. But no, you're not destroying your body. Where is that misinformation coming from? There is compelling, enormous evidence. Just go do a search on this to see what is the connection between Russian and Chinese disinformation, their disinformation machinery, and COVID disinformation. There's no question, no doubt, the State Department, the CIA, United States, and in Europe, all of the intelligence agencies have confirmed repeatedly, much, if not most, of this COVID misinformation is being generated in Russian troll farms, and they are spewing out this stuff on social media. And the doctors who are capitalizing on this and leveraging this misinformation take it and amplify it to their audience, and they use it to sell products. For example, this vaccine is poisoning you with a spike toxicity is killing you. So buy my spike detox package. For a mere $1,000 a year, you can protect yourself from the spike protein. So this is unqualified physicians who don't have the right credentials. Some don't even have any credentials, like not even have an internship or a residency. And they're selling misinformation and selling products based on that. They're leveraging it. And it's incredibly lucrative. If you look at the net worth of some of these fake experts and you compare it to what their net worth was a few years ago, they've made bank on this. This is I don't make any money doing what I do, combating misinformation, but maybe I'll, go to the other side, because these other folks have gone from being broke to being worth $10 and $20 million in just a few years. It's coming from Russia.
Okay, I did look at some of their credentials. It looked like they're cardiologists who don't have any background in infectious disease, and they're MDs, but they're not an FACP. What's an FACP, and why aren't they an FACP?
Okay, so to get a fellowship in the American College of Physicians, you have to have done research that is considered significant. Your research has to be vetted and approved and reviewed and studied and determined to be accurate, and it has to have had some clinical impact. I got my FACP because of research that I did when I was a medical student, much like other people who claim to be experts in COVID who did research as medical students and then claim that they discovered something. I did research as a medical student in my professor's lab on his dime. It was his research grant. I was the student working on a research project. I wrote a paper with those 2 doctors, and it was a significant paper. We worked out the molecular mechanism by which anticonvulsant, the anticonvulsant drug Dilantin works on us at the mitochondrial level. And so that was published in clinical research. I got an award for it. And based on that, I was awarded the FACP credential. Now, you made an interesting question. Is a cardiologist qualified to opine as an expert on infectious diseases? No, they're not. When you are a doctor in a hospital, you get privileges on what areas you are able to and what kinds of patients you can treat and what you can consult on. And those are called clinical privileges. A cardiologist has clinical privileges to treat cardiology patients, not infection patients. In order to be qualified to get privileges to treat infectious disease patients, you have to have training in infectious diseases. Now, it is true that a general internist can treat simple infections like pneumonia or bladder infections. But when it comes to any kind of complicated infection, that requires a consultation with an infectious disease doctor. Only fellowship trained and board certified infectious disease doctors can, by definition, be experts in COVID. If you're not a board certified, fellowship trained infectious disease doctor, you can't get privileges at a hospital to do infectious diseases. If you can't get privileges at a hospital because we want to protect patients, then by what right do you suddenly now have privileges to treat the entire world or advise the entire world? It's wrong. Only an infectious disease doctor is qualified to speak as an expert about infectious diseases. A cardiologist can speak as an expert about cardiac disease. An oncologist can speak as an expert on cancer, and so forth. You have to have the correct credentials. None, let me say this again, none of the anti-vax doctors you see on Fox News, cable news, Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, are infectious disease doctors. None of them.
Okay. I also saw a group, I think it's called Physicians for Informed Consent. I went through all their curriculum vitae because I'm curious, just want to see, and I didn't see any of them that were board certified in internal medicine. Is it because it's too hard or is it too easy? How come none of them are board certified in internal medicine, yet they talk a lot about, hey, you shouldn't take the vaccine? What's going on here?
You know, it's not easy. It's not because it's too easy. I'll tell you, being board certified in internal medicine is hard and getting harder. And I'm very fortunate. I was board certified in internal medicine in 1985, and I worked very hard at keeping up to date. But to be board certified in internal medicine, you have to have done an internal medicine internship and residency. That's 3 years of training. You have to do that, and you have to pass that, and then you have to pass this god-awful test. The Physicians for Informed Consent, I've looked at their resumes too. There may be an internist there, but most of them are most of the Physicians for Informed Consent are not even physicians. Some of them are lawyers, and some of them are nurses, and some of them are other people. There are a few doctors there, but they're mostly family practice doctors or general practitioners, and they're not infectious disease doctors. They're not internal medicine doctors for the most part.
Okay. I do go through their literature, and also they tend to scare the bejeevers out of me. They keep saying, oh, if you take the vaccine, you're going to die. All these people have died taking the vaccine. Is there any truth to that, or are they just there to scare people? What's the story?
No, there's no truth to that. And what are they claiming as the evidence? They're ultimately, it all goes back to VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System that was created by CDC. They don't understand VAERS, or they do and they don't care, and they're misusing VAERS. So with VAERS, it's a system, it's a database. Anybody, your Aunt Bertha, my Uncle Tony, who owned a radiator shop in Newark, New Jersey, anybody can submit a claim to VAERS that I got vaccinated and the next day my hair fell out, and claim that as a vaccine injury. It's a place for the unfiltered repository of any possible thing. From there, researchers then go through it and see if they can find the legitimate ones. Is a disclaimer on the VAERS website, and I would encourage everyone to go to vaers.gov and look at the disclaimer. And the disclaimer says you cannot use VAERS to assume there's a relationship, because the VAERS data may be inaccurate, coincidental, biased, unreproducible. There's all these reasons why you can't use the VAERS data that way. VAERS is useful. It serves a purpose. It was because of VAERS that myocarditis was identified after COVID vaccination. And it turned out to be very, very, very rare, transient, mild, and it goes away. But it was because of VAERS that we found it. But all of that other stuff on VAERS is all just people saying they think they got something from the vaccine. That's not a scientific way to go about it, but that's what Physicians for Informed Consent and all the others are relying on. They're misusing VAERS, and they use it to scare the population. Read the disclaimer. It's right on the VAERS website. You can't use VAERS that way. That is an improper use. It's unprofessional to use VAERS in the manner they're using it.
Right. Okay, well, it seems to me that we're not going to reach this 95% level anytime soon because too many people are scared about the vaccine. So what should you do? I took the vaccine because I'm going, I'd take my chances with the vaccine, which by the way, didn't bother me at all, except my arm was sore, as opposed to the getting COVID. So what should people do? Should they just not take the vaccine and wait for COVID, or should they go ahead and take the vaccine? Which is
based upon all the literature and based upon the hundreds of patients that I've treated in the last month, I recommend to be vaccinated fully and stay up to date. Every time there's a new vaccine that comes out from COVID, get it. Every year, get your flu shot. Get every vaccine that's appropriate for you. And that's my recommendation. We will not emerge from this mess for the foreseeable future. The anti-vax misinformation has penetrated deeply in the country, pushed by certain political types. And what we're going to see, we're already seeing a resurgence of childhood infectious diseases. Polio is back, measles is back, whooping cough is back. All these diseases are going to return. And it's only a matter of time before someone coughs up a new COVID variant that's worse than the first one. And then we'll see another wave of mortality. Or another virus will come along. And like this bird flu virus, that's really got a 50% mortality rate. If it catches on, we're in trouble. But they'll come up with a vaccine, but people won't take it because everybody's vaccine hesitant now because of false information put out by unqualified experts with fake and embellished resumes. So I don't see an end to this anytime soon. My advice is buyer beware, protect yourself, because that's the only thing you can do is protect yourself. And get vaccinated. Don't be a weenie. Get your vaccine.
Okay. Well, obviously, I don't go to Fox to get my medical information.
Good.
A lot of people do, but I do go to a place called the CDC. Is the CDC a viable place to go get your medical information? The Center for Disease Control.
Center for Disease Control is the premier organization in the world that tracks, identifies, and provides surveillance of infectious diseases over the entire world. CDC is responsible for identifying and helping to prevent catastrophes. No organization is perfect. We're all human. We all make mistakes. COVID was new. There were some miscommunication issues early on, but you can't expect perfection. But CDC is an iconic organization that has served humanity for half a century or more. If it wasn't for CDC, if it wasn't for World Health Organization, we would never have eradicated smallpox from the face of the earth. The attacks on CDC came from Donald Trump and Steve Bannon because they wanted to deflect blame for the disastrous COVID policy that they implemented. We want them infected. Everybody remember that? Remember COVID? Remember Trump's plan? We want them infected.
Yeah, I did see that, because then if everybody got infected, then that would be herd immunity. At least that was the theory.
The dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Okay. Well, the last place I go to is the Mayo Clinic. What are your thoughts about the Mayo Clinic? My wife even went there. They have one in Jacksonville and one in Rochester, Minnesota.
The Mayo Clinic is one of the leading hospitals in the world, and certainly one of the top in the United States. The upper echelon, the elite institutions and organizations in this country are places like Mayo Clinic, UCSF, Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, Harvard Medical School. These are the nation's leading institutions. That's where the experts are. That's who we should be listening to, not some guy on Fox who did an internship and isn't even board certified in anything.
I certainly agree with you, and we're out of time, but we do want to thank Dr. Patmas, who is board certified medical doctor that brings us up-to-date information regarding these medical things. And yeah, I would say please stay away from Facebook and Fox. Go to CDC and the Mayo Clinic and watch us on the Pod TV network broadcast in the United States and 150 other countries. And we'll see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.